back to another episode from Season 2, Silenced, the Death of Elisa Gomez. Today, Morph has lined up a very special guest, and she's got a bunch of great information. We're actually going to spend the next 2 episodes working with her. She's going to help us understand several different aspects of the case, and we're going to go through some of the autopsy information as well. Morph, you want to tell us who we've got?
Yeah, she is the forensic criminologist on seasons 8, 9, 10, and 11 of the Dr. Oz show. A few months ago, she was named one of the most influential women in forensic science in the world in Forensic Science International. She's a former deputy coroner, former district attorney investigator, and a current licensed private investigator. She's the author of the first book in the world on crime scene staging, and she's also a CEO of a firm specializing in death investigations. Let's welcome Dr. Laura Pettler.
Hello, Dr. Laura.
Hello.
Hi, Dr. Laura.
How are you all today?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate having your time and expertise on the show here. We've got a lot of information.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
You got it. Can you tell us the name of your book and what's special about it?
Sure. In 2015-16, we published a book called Crime Scene Staging Dynamics in Homicide Cases. It's the first book in the world that is dedicated exclusively to the examination of the phenomenon of crime scene staging, which could be defined as the manipulation or tampering of the physical and behavioral evidence in a crime scene or of a crime before the police arrive. It is published by CRC Press. I'm currently working on the second edition as far as like getting that outline submitted back to CRC. And we hope to have some new information in the second edition that expands on everything that was in the first edition. So it's kind of a desk reference. It's also a textbook. People use it for all kinds of different things. And it was the first log on the fire. It certainly by no means is the only book that we need on crime scene staging, but it kind of got the ball rolling. And I look forward to people, taking the ball and running with it at this point, because one person certainly can't compile all the research and publish it, in a lifetime. So it's going to take a team of people to catch up.
Definitely. And I think you're the right person to help us with this case, because obviously one of the things we're concerned about is the possibility that this is a staged crime scene that was ruled a suicide effectively by the police. So we really appreciate your expertise with that. Do you think there's is there a rise in staged crime scenes happening, or is it just that we're becoming more aware of it? Is it like a CSI effect because we're consuming so much of this content that people are trying to get away with these crimes in different ways?
Yes, it's all of those things. However, we don't have any statistics that confirm from a nationwide perspective that crime scene staging is increasing. However, there have been studies published on smaller samples that have confirmed that crime scene staging in homicide cases is increasing. So we do have some smaller statistics that we can apply, and depending on the sample size determines how broadly you can apply those statistics. So in general, can we say, yes, the CSI effect is increasing crime scene staging? We do have empirical data that has told us that. And in my opinion, as an expert on this particular topic, I believe that it is also increasing due to what people see in the media, and, that's a good idea. I had 2 cases years and years ago that both were females. One was on the side of a road, one was in a creek on the side of a road. They both had ligatures around their throats. One had blunt force trauma to the head. They were both wrapped in black plastic. They were both taped up with clear packing tape on either end of the black plastic. And it turned out it was 2 different offenders that had killed each of these women, but they had both watched the same episode of CSI.
Wow. And so your firm specializes in what you call victim-centered investigations. Can you tell us more about that approach?
Sure. Laura Pettler and Associates Death Investigations is based here in North Carolina, and we are a death investigations firm from crime scene to courtroom. So we have experts at a round table because everybody's equal as opposed to a rectangular table or a different shape. So from crime scene to courtroom, there's a team of experts who review cases, and we specialize in staged cases. In staged homicide cases, the number one way of catching the crime scene stager is to go victim-centered, meaning that you complete the victimology on the victim, meaning that you learn everything about the victim. What does the victim like to eat, like to drink? Does the victim smoke? What does the victim not like? What's the victim allergic to? What kind of shampoo does the victim use? What kind of deodorant? I mean, literally all these types of questions, all the way down to what time does the victim normally go to bed, get up in the morning? Do they go to the gym? Do they go to Starbucks? Like, what's their regular routine? You're going to have to learn everything you can about the victim, their medical history. Have they had a knee replacement? Have they had back surgery? Do they have a disease that they take a specific medication for? So it's multifaceted. We have a very, very, very large form that's online that goes out to our victims, families and friends or whoever it is that's brought the case here, the law enforcement agency, the private attorney in wrongful death civil cases. And they complete the forms that we give them. We give them one on suicidology, about the victim, one on domestic violence, one on personality, and then the overall victimology. We take all of that data and create a victimological profile of the victim and then begin the investigation from there. So then we compare the 911 call back to the victim in the crime scene, the autopsy back to the victim in the crime scene, and the 911 call. And it goes in pieces like this. So it's an empirical process. It's both quantitative and qualitative. It's scientific, multidisciplinary death investigation, which, quite frankly, is the way that they all should be.
Yeah.
But not all of them are. And so the ones that come here, a lot of times, are flipped upside down on the suspect side, and that's why they're cold. Right. You know, so when you go chasing a suspect, you know, really you catch a crime scene stager in the after behaviors, that the post-crime behaviors, that's where you catch the crime scene stager. Most often it's not in the crime scene. They can clean up. That doesn't mean they killed somebody. They can move something in the scene. That doesn't mean they killed somebody. But what they do after the death of the victim in their life, that's usually where you catch them.
Interesting. That's pretty interesting because this story in particular certainly has an aspect of that. As a matter of fact, I'm planning an episode specifically just about what happens after Elisa's death. I can just give you guys some information. We know that Brad starts driving her car around and referring to it as his vehicle. He thrashes the house. There's another roommate that was living there that was gone the weekend that this all happened. And he came back just a day or two after Elisa's death. Police led him into his room so he could collect his things, and his room had been ransacked. All items of value were taken. There's a bit more we're going to get into, but that's a really interesting aspect. I'm glad that we're deciding to focus in that way on that too. When you're processing a scene or information from a crime scene, do you have typical indicators that you're looking for that will help you indicate if it's a suicide versus a homicide or even an accident?
We actually take it a step back from manner of death right off the bat. So when you walk into a crime scene, you want to go in with an open mind. You want to go in completely impartial and objective, where you don't make any suppositions, you know, about what's gone on. Then you want to take a cursory look of the scene and understand what you're seeing. As a crime scene investigator, you know, what I like to see them do is to go in there and say, okay, I'm going to need this. I'm going to need this piece of equipment. I'm going to need to process with Blue Star. Or they get, you know, they come up with a viable plan, and then they apply the plan. They go back out. They get their materials and equipment that they need, and they process it. When they start processing the scene, at that point, they may discover areas that have been cleaned up or that do not match. So on the crime scene investigation side, the physical evidence technicians who are there to identify, document, collect, and preserve, they could discover red flags of crime scene staging. From the forensic criminology side of the house and from the detective side of the house, it's a little different. What we recommend is something called Pettler's Trilogy. Pettler's Trilogy was published in my dissertation years ago, and also in part, and then it was also part of the book in 2015-16. And Pettler's Trilogy has, of course, 3 parts. The first question that you ask when you get out of the car, if you're a detective, is there somebody in conflict with this victim?
Okay.
Is there preceding conflict between the victim and somebody else? If the answer is yes, you have your first red flag.
Okay, we've got a yes there.
The second question, yes, got a yes. The second question in Pettler's Trilogy is, who discovered the victim? If it is the same person who is in preceding conflict with the victim, you have your second red flag.
That's a yes.
Yeah.
The third question for in Pettler's crime scene staging trilogy is, who called 911 and what did they report? So if it's the same person who discovered the victim and the same person who is in preceding conflict, that's your third red flag.
Okay.
If you have 2 or more red flags, we recommend raising awareness that you could be dealing with a staged scene because there is preceding conflict, and you don't just chalk it up as a suicide and go home. You don't just chalk it up as an accident and go home. You've got 2 out of 3 red flags. Even 1, it just conflict, because conflict is present in the empirical data in 100% of staged homicides. Wow. 100%. You do not have murder in a vacuum. It's conflict resolution for those offenders. So those are the 3 primary things we do, like from the investigatory side of the house, detectives and forensic criminologists. And then, like I said, on this crime scene investigation side, that's a different piece.
Right.
So they're actually looking for physical changes in the scene, manipulation. The best way of doing that is to take the 911 call, stand in the scene, and listen to it and compare it to what you're looking at. Mm-hmm. Crime scene stagers are often in cognitive overload. They can't keep their details straight. So what they say on the 911 call, you may look at the scene and go, "That's not what we have here at all."
Right.
And there's your big, physical evidence red flag that you've got a problem.
Well, we've got a clear yes on the first 2, and on the third one, I don't know that we're that far off with this case. We do have him supposedly discovering the body and then going to another roommate's bedroom and telling her about it and telling her that she needs to cut her down and call 911. He's not the one that actually places the call, but he makes the roommate essentially do it. There's also a slight discrepancy. I don't have a copy of the 911 transcript or tapes. I'm working and seeing if we can get that. But from what I hear from the family, there's some type of discrepancy about what was originally called in, because they're seeing on some of the police logs that it was originally called in as a heart attack. They thought she had a heart attack, and then it changes. The status of the call actually changes to a possible suicide, and then later, after they arrive, it seems like it changes to a DOA.
Doesn't it seem even more suspicious that he got her to call 911 instead of him calling 911?
In cases where it's a staged homicide, in those types of cases, whatever we see the offender do, for example, gets the roommate to call 911 instead of him calling 911 or her calling 911, it's because it meets the needs of the offender. These crime scene stagers, when they ask somebody else to call or ask somebody else to move the body, take the gun away, things like that, It's all because they think that's how they can stay in control of the scene. So the fact that he asks her is very similar to what we saw, and I'm just giving this an example. I'm certainly not implying that this case is a staged homicide, but in a relation to getting somebody else to call, Scott Peterson called Sharon Roca and said, "My wife Lacey is missing." Mm-hmm. Sharon Roca was Lacey's mother, and Sharon said to her husband, Lacey's stepdad, "Oh, Lacey's missing. Lacey's missing." Stepdad actually is the one who calls it in.
Right. Yeah.
We see it in Casey Anthony. Casey Anthony, Kaylee Anthony, and Cindy Anthony in the dialogue between Casey and her mother. Her mother is the one who actually calls it in.
Yeah.
So, there's staged cases out there. Obviously, those two are both staged. I understand that Casey Anthony was acquitted, but my opinion is that it was a staged homicide. In general, I don't know if she did it or Dad did it or whoever Joe Schmo down the street did it, but it's consistent. Obviously, with a homicide, the child didn't put herself in that swamp. So, there's foul play involved in some level. But regardless, those are two examples of, calls made by other people and not the person who discovers the victim is injured, missing, or deceased.
So, knowing that you've written a dissertation on this topic, you've written a book about this topic, you've effectively launched a business about these particular types of crimes, how many cases do you think you've handled where you've had an assumed suicide and it was later found to actually be a staged homicide?
Dozens. We have more staged suicides come in. Actually, I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that. We have more cases come here that are ruled suicide than any other manner of death. Some of those cases are found to be suicides, legitimately suicides, and some of those cases are found to be homicides. The ones that are homicides, we try to work with the agencies to move those cases forward. Some agencies do move them forward and some don't.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we have some that are actually genuinely suicides because suicide is so difficult to accept. Sometimes families want a second look. They don't just want to take the word for the investigators who are originally on the case. So they send the case to LPA to have a second look. And so we've had dozens and dozens of them over the years. We've been in business since 2005.
Wow.
So it's been a lot. And then, of course, all the cases I saw in the DA's office and, in other agencies that I've worked with over the years. I mean, I don't even know how many, but it's definitely a lot.
Okay. The family was concerned that when they saw her body eventually, that her forehead seemed swollen, or they described it as possibly protruded. And her mother said that there was a lot of makeup on her, they thought, to possibly hide some bruising on her forehead. Is that due to some aspect of the autopsy procedure, or is there something else that regularly happens around these processes?
Right. Without seeing it, it would be hard to say. One of the things that I think is important to consider in this case is that two things. The first thing is that neighbors reported an argument in the front area of the home, in the yard, somewhere like that, and a cell phone was found in a bush or in some mulch or something, somewhere like in the yard, outside, basically where it didn't belong. Somebody's cell phone was out there. But I think all those phones were collected by police, as I saw in the evidence log. And they were also cell-brighted. They were extracted for data, which was exactly the right thing that the police should have done.
Yeah.
And they did investigate this case. So then the second thing to consider is not only was there a preceding argument prior to the death of the victim, but there was also evidence of alcohol use on this particular night. And people that drink sometimes fall down, sometimes hit their head on a cabinet, or anything, can happen if you're intoxicated. And the BAC comes back, I believe it's 0.133.
Yeah.
And so it's considered intoxicated. A medical examiner would have to give you what type of impairment you would see at that level, because that's a medical question. However, people that drink heavily have accidents. They do fall. And a lot of times when we see them deceased, we do see lots of bruising and swelling, areas of swelling on their bodies from just simple injuries that happen, bumps and bruises that happen to them through the course of substance abuse.
So we know that, yeah, as you pointed out, there was a disagreement that happened. Neighbors called police around 2:30 a.m. We know that we hear that Brad tells Sharon about Elisa being down in the basement approximately 8 a.m. One of the things we've been trying to determine is a time of death. And we know that when the first responders arrive and they tend to Elisa, we hear in the body cam footage, one of them actually state, "We've got rigor." Can that help us determine how much time has passed?
It can, under various circumstances. So there's many things that influence rigor. And again, I'm not a forensic pathologist and I'm not medically trained, but from an investigatory standpoint, you do hear the investigators talk about, or at least mention, we've got rigor. And to my knowledge, I believe it was in the upper extremities in this case. And what that says is that rigor had set in. What they're talking about is that the stiffness of the jaw and maybe the neck and the upper part of the shoulders and maybe the arms. That's my interpretation of upper extremities. And rigor starts in the jaw and works outward in the body. So it goes from the jaw to the tips of the fingers and toes, and then it recedes the same way. It recedes from the toes back to the jaw. So
right.
If it's only, you have two ways, of course, to look at this. Is rigor coming in or rigor is going out? Well, of course, there's an argument at 2:30, whatever time that was, that the neighbors called and said they heard an argument or reported they heard an argument. So you know that the victim in this case is alive at that point.
Yeah.
So then when you have rigor in the upper extremities at 8:30 in the morning, that is rigor coming in. So it's coming into the body. So it's consistent with, I've heard forensic pathologists in my career, when I've asked them, I've asked many, many forensic pathologists, what's the thing on rigor? How soon does it set in? I think that if I had to say and summarize what they've told me over the years, it's somewhere like between 2 and 6 hours that it sets in.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's just giving you a general range of, me summarizing conversations over 18 years with forensic pathologists. Some might say, 1 hour to 5, you know what I mean? Then you might get another one that says 2 to 6. You know what I'm saying? So they may give you a little different range. They may have different opinions, but in general, somewhere around 2 to 6 is, I think, what I've heard the most often.
Okay.
From the medical community. And then it's also, it's important to note that the temperature, the humidity, and a lot of environmental factors, whether a body's in water, whether it's frozen, all those kinds of things, of course, play a role in the general determination of time of death.
Yeah.
For medical examiners and forensic pathologists, coroners. So they use all kinds of environmental factors on top of the changes in the postmortem interval changes of the body itself to understand time of death.
Where would that analysis show up? Because the family isn't aware of any analysis like that happening, a time of death determination.
It looks like in this case, based on the documents that are available, the incident report and the autopsy report, that that information would be contained within the scope of the medical examiner. And it appears that the investigators at the police agency were dependent on the autopsy results towards moving forward with their investigation. And, so they don't determine manner of death from a medical standpoint. They may determine it based on their investigation.
Right.
In their opinion, but they don't determine it from the actual postmortem interval changes of the body itself. That's a medical function.
Okay, so it sounds like it's something that if we get to talk to the medical examiner, we should ask him about if they tried to do any determination in terms of time of death.
Yes. Yeah, and you may be able to just say, you noted rigor in the upper extremities or something like that, like, repeat to the area. And then that forensic pathologist, based on the information you're providing, might be able to render an opinion on, what he or she thinks. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll be right back after this quick break.
A lot of us struggle with finding happiness, dealing with tough life issues, and so much more. But you don't have to struggle alone, and you don't even have to leave your home to get the help you need, thanks to BetterHelp Online Counseling.
BetterHelp is available on desktop or mobile for both Android or iOS. You can speak to a counselor via text, chat, phone, or video.
Find secure, convenient, professional help that's affordable with BetterHelp.
BetterHelp isn't a crisis line, but you can find licensed professional counselors that you can speak to from the comfort of your own home.
3 Men and a Mystery listeners get 10% off your first month with discount code 3MEN. So why not get started today? Go to betterhelp.com/3men. Financial aid is available to those who qualify. Simply fill out a questionnaire to help them assess your needs and get matched with a counselor you'll love. That's betterhelp.com/3men. Find help to break through those personal obstacles with BetterHelp. Welcome back, and please keep in mind that our sponsors are helping us raise funds that will go towards investigating this case further and honoring the life of Elisa Gomez. So please show them the same support they're showing us. Now back to our interview with Dr. Pettler. Dr. Laura, how common is suicide by hanging?
I don't know for sure what the actual statistics are for the United States or per state or per county. A lot of times you can find that information through the coroner system or the medical examiner system per state to get kind of an average. I do know that in the increase in suicides that we've seen, we have 40 to 45,000 suicides per year in the United States. One of the leading causes of death is suffocation for female suicide victims.
Okay. And how often are suicide notes left behind?
According to the newest research that I've seen within the past few years, published by Dr. Catherine Ramsland, I believe that when she and I discussed her research, it was less than 5%. It might have been about 3%, but it was a very low number. I remember her sharing and discussing with me, if I remember that correctly. I have not personally conducted suicide note research myself.
Right.
So I don't want to, lock down into a specific number, but my understanding is that it's a very small percentage compared to the myth that there are suicide notes in almost every case.
Yeah. Is there a reason for that? Why you think it's so low?
No, I don't. I think that a lot of people misunderstand suicidality in ways. It can be spontaneous. It can be an impulsive thing. I think that a lot of people who look at depressive people that suffer from major depressive disorder or bipolar disorder, assume that a person always dies of suicide in the depressive phase, which is not true. People can also die of suicide in the manic phase of a bipolar person. So it's really like what society kind of thinks, like the general public's idea of, why there are suicide notes in every case. Like if you hear someone died of suicide, oh my gosh, well, did they leave a note? What did the note say? Yeah. And, they don't always have a note. We had a case this year where there was no note present in the law enforcement investigation. And then when LPA, Laura Pettler and Associates, deployed investigators on the ground up there and started interviewing people, somebody came forward with a note that was left in the scene of where the decedent was recovered, and it was confirmed by the decedent's relatives that it was the decedent's handwriting and the way she had written and everything. And when, the person was asked, well, why did you never turn this over? And the person said, well, I thought I already did. Wow. And of course, the person had not turned that over. So the case was ruled suicide by the law enforcement agency and the medical examiner in that particular instance. LPA also ruled it suicide here.
Now I
know it was suicide for us too.
Yeah. Now I know we've looked at this case from the side of staged homicide, and I say we hit 2.5 of the 3 indicators. But you've looked through the materials that we presented to you. Are you seeing typical indicators for this to actually be a suicide?
So in the trilogy, in Pettler's trilogy, we use that to build awareness. So the fact that we've got 2 red flags out of 3, that's just going to flag the case as a case that you want to be careful with.
Yeah.
So it doesn't tell us that the case is staged. It doesn't tell us that the case is a murder.
Right.
It tells us that, hey, you've got 2 red flags. You guys be careful here. Proceed like it could be a homicide until you know otherwise.
Yeah.
And so that's what the trilogy does. The other aspects of this case that I would examine would be the preceding conflict. We use something here called the CRB, and what that stands for is conflict resolution benefit. In conflict resolution benefit, in that model, you always want to ask, of course, who's in conflict with the victim. In this case, we know that the spouse is in conflict with the victim.
Yeah.
There's an argument between them within hours before her death. In my experience, I've seen lots of staged suicides or lots of cases that come in for evaluation where there is an argument within hours before death. There's an immediate conflict, where we would call it immediate, meaning that it's right before it's right before the person dies.
Yeah.
And there's absolutely no question that if you've got an argument right before the person dies, that you should automatically proceed with caution and not just chalk it up as a suicide or accident and go home. These investigators didn't do that. They definitely did not just say, okay, this is an open and shut case.
Right.
They collected things. They processed it. So I'm certainly not criticizing what they did. They definitely did investigate this. But then what you want to do with the conflict, now that you know that the victim is in conflict with the offender, with the person that there's preceding conflict with.
Yeah.
You want to identify what those conflicts are. Is it an unwanted pregnancy? Is it an affair? Is it chores? I've seen people kill over chores. Is it politics? Is it alimony? Is it child support? There's a million things. Is it divorce? Is it a breakup? Is it to keep a secret? People kill just to keep a secret so that the person that's dead can't tell anybody.
Right.
So you have to identify what the conflict is between the victim and the person that he or she is in conflict with. The second piece of this is resolution. How does that person who is in conflict with the victim resolve the conflict? Clearly, murderers choose murder. But in 9 times out of 10, people don't choose murder. They choose to sit down and have a discussion if they're in conflict with their intimate partner.
Yeah.
Let's sit down and talk about this. Let's find some middle ground. Let's find a compromise. That's what normal people do. But we have some people that choose murder instead of sitting down and coming up with a compromise, or sitting down and entering into a consensual separation agreement, or agreeing on an amount of alimony,
right,
or an agreeing amount of child support. Those are all reasons that I've seen in my career why somebody would kill someone. Property gain is another one. If a person has a life insurance policy and there's a lot of debt, or a person wants to rob somebody else, but you got to have, a dead victim so that you can take what they have.
Right.
So that's, another reason for staging. So how do they resolve it? The crime scene is going to be a reflection of the personality of the offender in a murder. A death scene that is not a murder is going to not be reflective of any other personality, probably than the victim. I couldn't say for sure, but just in generally speaking.
Yeah.
And then the third piece is benefit. You have to ask yourself. You've asked yourself who's in conflict with this victim and what's the conflict. How would that person resolve the conflict? Did they resolve it with murder, or did they resolve it with a physical fight in the front yard? Do they resolve it by leaving for the night and going and staying at a friend's? What's the timeline there? And then the third piece is, well, who benefits from the victim's death?
Right.
So if you've got a life insurance policy and debt in the first column, where there's a bunch of debt, guy or girl knows, I can get a bunch of money if this person's dead, then, who benefits from the victim's death? That person, the man or woman involved in the intimate partner's death, for sure.
Yeah.
So the CRB is very, very helpful because it's a visual for a jury. It's a visual for a prosecutor. It's a visual for an investigator to show how you get there.
Yeah.
Here's the conflict before she or he died. Here's how it was resolved. And here is how this person that committed this crime benefited from the death of the victim. Somebody's always going to benefit from the victim's death, but you might have 10 suspects in a homicide case, but only one of them is going to really shine in that in the CRB for the benefit column.
Yeah.
You might have a person that nobody likes. 10 people don't like that person, but 10 people aren't going to benefit from the victim's death. They might just, be rid of them they don't have to deal with them at work or something anymore. But it's only going to be like the intimate partner that would benefit from like the insurance policy or something.
Yeah.
And they're quick to call. They want that death certificate immediately. And they do not want it to say suicide, because they cannot collect
right
on some insurance policy. So they're crazy over the manner of death ruling. A lot of times we leave them undetermined. And then, of course, a lot of insurance policies won't pay out if there are charges against an intimate partner.
I think that's one of the things, the whole, it was CRB, right? CRB analysis?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is, from the family's perspective, that analysis is done. This guy married her, 12 hours later, she's dead. Everything she owns now becomes his.
Right.
So I get it. I get why that could be such an important tool, especially for carrying things through to a prosecution situation.
Right, because sometimes it gets so muddled, it's everything gets so confusing. People get caught in the white noise and the minutia of the case instead of getting it down to the critical pieces of evidence and sequestering all of that white noise. Sequester it all and get it all in one place and take the critical pieces. Who's in conflict? How is it resolved? And who benefits? And pare it down to just those three key pieces, and then see if you have a murder.
Right.
See if you've got a murder. I don't know if you do or not. But in general, these are the types of tools that we use scientifically that are empirically grounded and created by the empirical results of research in this area that we're using to promote and give to law enforcement to use in the field, so they can take a case like this one that we're talking about today and use those tools to figure out really what happened here.
Yeah. Is it common that in ligature hanging situations, the body is removed from the ligature before emergency services arrive or even called?
I've seen it both ways in my career, and I'm only one person, so you could talk to somebody else and they may say yes or no.
Sure.
I've seen a lot of staged ligature deaths where the ligature remains on the victim until police are there.
Yeah.
So, in my personal experience, but I think that my scope is fairly limited, to be honest with you, because we specialize in one type of case.
Right.
And so I wouldn't want to take my experience and apply it with a broad brush nationwide. You may get another person who has a different type of experience with different types of cases that could give you a totally different answer.
Well, and I suppose it really just highlights that there could be potentially two different ways that could go. Either the person that's staging the scene wants the ligature on the person when emergency services shows up so that their story is sold, so that emergency services buys, oh, look, this person's hanging, this is obviously a suicide. But in a case like this, I could also see the potential for, if the person was worried about the ligature not looking right, like I've seen some cases where the knot is on the front of the person, and it's the wrong direction for a strangulation, and all of a sudden that turns into a homicide. So if he's worried about that, it could be him putting into motion, hey, the roommate, go cut her down, and then call 911. Could be to kind of mess up the crime scene a little bit. Yeah, I'm not sure. That's
well, what's he doing? Why is he giving these instructions for his own wife to somebody else? What is he going to go do?
Right.
He's going to go eat breakfast. He's going to go sit down for a cup of coffee. I mean, what's he going to do while she's cutting down and calling 911? It'd be different if he said, I call 911, I've already cut her down. Yeah. And, then he runs back down there and starts to render aid. So there's lots of scenarios that investigators would have to explore here and discuss with him during an interview. And in the crime scene staging world, that would, of course, raise a red flag to ask more questions. It doesn't mean it's murder. It just means ask more questions. Is he a slight man? Is he a slight man where, he's 5'2" and 110 pounds, and he may not have been able to physically cut her down? Does he have a back problem? Has he had some type of surgery that prevents him from being able to physically perform the task? These are all questions. You just can't jump straight to the conclusion that it's a suspicious behavior, because there's always more than one explanation for why something could happen. It's the totality of circumstances that makes a case homicide or suicide or something like that in this particular instance.
Yeah. The death certificate notes Lauren Wilson Jackson as the medical examiner and states the cause of death as ligature hanging with other contributing conditions noted as alcohol, ethanol intoxication, and recent prescribed amphetamine use. Toxicology results note ethanol 0.133 grams per deciliter. So obviously we know she was drinking. We've seen footage of them at the bar, so we know that was happening. But it also notes the amphetamine at 0.05 milligrams per liter and states no methamphetamines are detected. I actually spoke to Judy, Elisa's mother, and asked about this medication to try to figure out what it was. She couldn't remember the exact name of it, but it was a medication that Elisa was taking to treat lupus. And she had been taking it for years. So this wasn't a new type of medication or anything like that for her. There is one interesting question. The toxicology doesn't mention anything about marijuana, and there was a case in what is known as a single hitter that was found in the sweater that she was wearing. Dr. Laura, would it be reasonable for us to think that the toxicology test would have said if she was using marijuana or not?
In my experience, there is a standard panel that's most often used, and so when a body is sent to autopsy and then they take samples of organs and vitreous fluid from eyes and blood and things like that, they submit whatever panel they think is most appropriate for the case.
Yeah.
I've seen some agencies that just do a standard panel, and marijuana is included on that panel. And then there's other states and counties and things that I've seen where they don't include it. So because there's no standardized system in the United States for multidisciplinary death investigation, we're all confused usually until we learn the system of that particular county and state,
right,
for how they do things and what they request.
Would it have triggered them to test for it, though, knowing that they actually found a box and a single hitter in her clothing?
Yes, I think that would be something that if the medical examiner was aware of that, they may choose to test for marijuana, yes.
Okay. The death certificate also states that manner of death could not be determined. This is obviously a very big point in this whole case. Have you seen many cases where a ligature hanging isn't concluded to be a suicide?
I haven't seen it in as many ligature hangings. We haven't had as many of those as we do gunshot wounds and stabbing deaths.
Yeah.
We have, probably a handful of hanging deaths over the past several years. So, in my experience, a medical examiner leaves it open as undetermined because there's a pending investigation going on and they don't want to jump the gun and rule it one way or the other based on what they know at that moment. They want to consider the totality, which, the medical examiner did the right thing. He or she is taking the totality of circumstances and saying, I can't determine this. But leaving it open like that's the right thing to do because it gives the agency that's investigating the case time to maybe gather more information and then take it back for a meeting with the medical examiner and present their findings of why they think a particular manner of death is most appropriate for a decedent, whether it's, natural accident, suicide, homicide, undetermined. Of course, in many cases, there's a discrepancy where you have a law enforcement agency that rules it one way, and they don't rule manner of death. Obviously, the signature on the death certificate is the person who rules manner of death.
Right.
So, it's a coroner, it is a medical examiner, it's a person of that nature. A law enforcement agency is going to say, based on our information, we believe the death of this decedent is this particular manner of death, for one way or the other. But there's a lot of times where there's a disagreement between the agencies, where the agency will say, well, I think it's suicide or I think it's a homicide. And then the medical examiner might say, well, I think it's undetermined right now. You guys don't have enough, and I don't have enough on the body to conclusively, from a multidisciplinary standpoint, conclusively may render an opinion on manner of death. So I'm leaving it as undetermined until we get more information.
Yeah, which is exactly what we have going on here. In the final diagnosis section, it states that Elisa was found hanging in her basement and she was, quote, partially suspended from door frame of her basement bedroom. We know from the body cam footage that first responders found her on the ground. They didn't see her suspended at all, supposedly after she had been cut down using fingernail clippers by Sharon, even though the scarf is still seemingly intact and is actually hanging from a beam, not a doorway at all. In your line of work, do you see discrepancies like this very often, particularly in an autopsy report?
Not particularly in an autopsy report, but in the investigatory files and the interviews we do. And in this case, we would reconstruct it to basically start to learn more about, could the victim in this case actually perform this act? You have to take into consideration, like I said, with victimology, the physical nature of the victim. This victim was I think 5'4" or so, with an average height, average weight, didn't report, any medical impairment, like a broken leg, for example, broken arm, or a back problem, or some type of other problem,
right,
that would prevent her from performing this event of tying a scarf around the neck. The other thing is that the basement is her bedroom.
Yeah.
And so that's the location is important. She's not taken down to the basement from a second floor bedroom. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like she's out of place. She's actually in the right place.
Yeah.
In the house.
Right.
And so I think that's an important factor. But, I don't know that in the staged cases that I've seen in my career, the ligatures are most often on the victims when the law enforcement agency gets there. And sometimes they're staged abduction, sexual assault, homicides in trunks or whatever, dumped out in fields or sides of roads, things like that. The ligatures are all left on.
Right. We've actually tried to debate this a little bit before just among the guys here, but it kind of strikes us as odd that you would have the autopsy report read like such a clear and clean scientific document in some ways, in particular when it's talking about what state the organs are in and measurements and weights. Mm-hmm. But then you get these comments that are coming from the investigation. And like those comments I just read, some of them aren't even right. You know, she wasn't found hanging in the basement. She wasn't found hanging from a door frame. Is it normal for facts that weren't observed by the responders to be presented in a diagnosis like this?
It is normal for miscommunications to occur between agencies.
Okay. Got it.
It is absolutely normal. And unfortunately, it can be very detrimental to a case in situations where there is a simultaneous investigation going on while the autopsy is being performed or the report's being written or something like that. And information from the investigation in the field is not being conveyed back to the medical examiner or to the autopsy personnel.
Right.
So that can be taken into consideration in totality in the scene. I mean, the autopsies that I've been to, we talk with the medical examiners and say, okay, here's what happened. Here's what we saw. Here are the pictures.
Right.
We had one case where a guy went off the road. He hit a cow in the middle of the road and it sent him careening into the pasture. He wrecked and his airbag deployed and it sent shrapnel through his neck. It killed him.
Wow.
At autopsy, the medical examiner said that he had a gunshot wound to the neck. The coroner, who was standing right there and saw the airbag, saw the shrapnel in the car, saw the shrapnel in the guy's throat, told the medical examiner, no, it's shrapnel from an airbag.
Right.
And so there was a discrepancy based on where the medical examiner was seeing on the body compared to what was going on in the investigation in the field. So all of those things might not be communicated properly or accurately, not maliciously, just not everybody on the same page kind of thing.
Sure.
And then you see errors like what you're describing, like, she was found hanging as opposed to found, on the floor, something like that. So it's usually a communication error.
Yeah, and just to highlight, there's a couple of other things that it seems weren't communicated properly either. Like they found evidence of a fight in the front yard, the gates busted up, a light's broken, a cell phone had been thrown 2 houses down, neighbors called 911 the night before. I mean, none of those considerations wind up there. So it's interesting that some make it in and some don't.
I think that I don't know this case, from the medical examiner standpoint. Of course, I've never spoken with the medical examiner or not, but the medical examiner left it undetermined.
Yeah.
So the fact that it's undetermined says a lot. It speaks volumes to me that the medical examiner did not have enough information to rule at the time a conclusive manner of death. I mean, do you have enough evidence to support ruling someone's death suicide? Yes or no? Do you have enough to support empirically, if you're challenged, will your opinion stand up to scrutiny? Right? And so like this medical examiner saying, I don't know. And that's the most ethical, honest, medically appropriate way that they could handle a case like this. If you're the medical examiner, you want to make sure you're doing the right thing.
Right.
This person clearly wants to do the right thing. Or he could have easily just ruled it suicide.
Yeah, it's true.
But he didn't. So this is one of the better ones I've seen in the country, across the nation, really.
Well, that's the end of the first part of our interview with Dr. Laura. She'll be back next time to tell us even more. But fellas, what was the biggest takeaway for you from what we heard from her today?
I, for one, was surprised at the lack of suicide notes in most suicide cases. I always thought, and maybe it's from watching so many movies and TV, that, hey, they committed suicide or they took their own life, and here's this note, and there's a reason why, and it gives them something to go on. And to find out that happens very rarely, that was a little bit surprising.
Yeah, I'm still caught up on the thought of how expressive Elisa was as a person, just being an artist and a prolific artist. I mean, she did a lot of art. I've looked at a lot of it myself. And then to know that, or to think of the possibility that she would end her life and not leave a statement. But I think one of you, and I don't remember if we talked about this in an episode or outside of it, one of you stated maybe the act was the statement. And I think that's a pretty important consideration. What about for you, Gray?
Yeah, I was just amazed at all of the information that you look at as to determine whether or not it's a staged suicide or not. I mean, we do think of things, but she actually went through and discussed many more aspects. And Morph also, great minds think alike. That's exactly what I was thinking too earlier. Was like, wow, only 3% leave notes. That is insane. I mean, you would think based on TV and everything, that there's notes every time except a few, right?
Right.
And maybe that's because people want some kind of answer, and that note maybe provides something, but to realize that families don't get a note most of the times, that's pretty enlightening.
I think it might actually speak to how many of them are spur of the moment. Like they're just right now feeling so down and devastated about something, and they just kill themselves. They didn't spend time thinking about it and writing a note. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's an important thing to consider too, about how logical are you thinking if you're heading into that situation? And if you are looking at it as an escape, are you going to think about, well, I've got to, cross these T's and dot these I's before I actually get out of here? Yeah, I don't know. I was really impressed by how she's using her methods to take what you might even consider like social information and then work that into what feels like a scientific process. And I like that she's got these kind of indicator systems and presentation systems for explaining to other people, the causes behind what's going on with these cases. Really, really enlightening, really good stuff. And I know we're going to have a bunch more great information for you guys on the next episode with her.
Yeah, and don't forget to join us on a live stream on December 18th, 2019 at 6 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Central, and 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and 7 p.m. Mountain Time.
Don't forget Mountain Time, Gray. That's right. Yeah. And that live stream is going to be hosted.
It's going to be on Gray Hughes Investigates, and make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss it.
Remember, you can find all the information and links you need for any specific episode all together in one place at www.3menandamystery.com. That's with the number 3. And if you have information to help shine the light of truth on this case, please send it in. There's several people we would love to talk to. You know who you are. We're easy to find. Just get to that website. You'll also find a Patreon link at 3menandamystery.com so you can help support our efforts and get some cool perks by joining.
If you have any feedback, corrections, or new details, they can be sent to us via email at 3men@3menandamystery.com, again with the number 3. Or you can reach out to us on Twitter at 3menandamystery, or find us on Facebook. And if you're looking for another true crime podcast to listen to while you're waiting for the next episode of 3 Men and a Mystery, consider True Crime Fix. Here's a sample.
How many of you know the name Linda Goff or Sarah Marsland? I bet you will have heard of their murderers though, Fred West and Harold Shipman. Hi everybody, this is Steve, the host of True Crime Fix, the podcast which gives the story whilst giving the victim the loudest voice of them all. So far we've covered cases such as Colette Aram, Kitty Genovese, Jackie Paul, JC Sawyer and Molly McLaren. I'll be releasing new episodes every other Friday via Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify and all other available stations. So please come over and subscribe and give my podcast a listen. I really hope that you find these episodes informative. If you would like further information, please follow me on Twitter at TrueCrimeFixPod or find me on Facebook, True Crime Fix Podcast. And remember, stay safe, look after each other, and live life to the fullest, because you never know who or what might be coming around the next corner. Take care, everyone.
3 Men in a Mystery is produced by John Lorden, Mike Morford, and Gray Hughes.
Please rate us on the podcasting platform that you found us on and help us grow by telling your friends and family about us.
And next time we'll be back with more Dr. Laura, plus very interesting developments in the case that I have to share with everyone. Not even Morford Gray know what those are yet. You don't want to miss it on the next 3 Men and a Mystery. I'm John Lorden.
Mike Morford.
And I'm Gray Hughes.
And we are 3 Men and a Mystery.